I never really believed in the supernatural. Ghosts and demons always felt like things people made up to make life more interesting. Real horror, in my experience, comes from people. It comes from the things you can't quite explain, but know are wrong. That is exactly what happened when I moved into the duplex on Cedar Avenue about 3 years ago. It was a decent place, a single-story building split down the middle. I had the left side, and my neighbor, a man named Mr. Kempler, had the right. The first month was painfully ordinary. Mr. Kempler was an older guy, maybe in his late 60s. He was the kind of neighbor you rarely saw. His blinds were always drawn tight, and his car, an old beat-up sedan, rarely moved from the driveway. When we did cross paths while taking out the trash or checking the mail, he would just offer a stiff nod. He never smiled. He never tried to make small talk about the weather or the neighborhood. I actually liked that at first. I value my privacy, and having a silent neighbor felt like a blessing compared to the loud parties I dealt with at my last apartment. Things started to get strange around the second month. It began with the noises. The walls in that duplex were thin, but not paper thin. You could hear a muffled TV or a door slamming, but usually it was quiet. But then I started hearing this rhythmic thumping sound at night. It wasn't loud, just persistent. It sounded like someone was dropping a heavy book on the floor, picking it up, and dropping it again. It always started around 2 a.m. I worked a 9-to-5 job, so this was wrecking my sleep. I would lie there in bed, staring at the ceiling, just waiting for the next sound. I assumed he was just doing some late-night cleaning or maybe exercising, as weird as that seemed for a man his age. I tried to ignore it. I bought earplugs. I turned on a white noise machine, but the vibration of the thud seemed to travel through the floorboards and right into my bed frame. One Tuesday, I stayed home sick from work. My car was in the shop, so my driveway was empty. It must have looked like I wasn't home. I was lying on the couch in the living room reading a book when I heard a noise that froze my blood. It came from the shared wall in the living room. It was a slow, deliberate scratching sound. It sounded like metal against plaster. I sat up and listened. The scratching moved. It started near the floor and slowly worked its way up the wall inch by inch until it was right around eye level. Then it stopped. I held my breath. A few seconds later, I heard a soft exhale. It was so clear, it sounded like someone was standing right next to me, but it was coming from the other side of the wall. Someone was pressing their ear against the drywall, listening to my living room. I felt a wave of violation wash over me. I wanted to bang on the wall and scream, but something told me to stay quiet. I carefully got up and walked to the kitchen on the tip of my toes. I grabbed a glass of water and deliberately knocked it into the sink. It shattered loudly. Immediately, from the other side of the wall, I heard a frantic shuffling sound, like someone scrambling away, followed by the heavy slam of a door. He had been listening. He knew I was home now. The dynamic changed after that day. I started watching him. I noticed that whenever I left my house, his curtains would twitch. Just a tiny movement in the corner, enough for an eye to peer through. I stopped feeling safe in my own home. I started checking the mirrors in my house to make sure nobody was behind me. I checked the locks 3 times before bed. The thumping noises at night stopped, which somehow made it worse. The silence felt heavy. The breaking point happened 2 weeks later. I came home late from a dinner with friends. It was pouring rain, a classic stormy night. I parked on the street because a delivery truck was blocking part of the driveway. As I walked up the path to my front door, I dropped my keys. They slid off to wet concrete and into the bushes that separated my porch from Mr. Kempler's porch. I knelt down to find them, using the flashlight on my phone. The bushes were thick and overgrown. As I reached in to grab my keys, my light beam hit something near the foundation of the house, right under Mr. Kempler's living room window. The heavy rain had washed away some of the mulch and dirt. I froze. There was a hole in the foundation. It wasn't a natural crack. It had been dug out. It was big enough for a person to crawl through. I shined the light deeper. The crawl space under our duplex was connected. There was no divider. It was just one open dirt area underneath both our apartments. My heart hammered against my ribs. I saw drag marks in the mud leading from his side under the beam and disappearing into the darkness under my floorboards. I didn't go inside. I ran back to my car and locked the doors. I sat there, shaking, watching the dark windows of his house. I called the police immediately. I told them I heard an intruder and saw someone crawling under the house. It was the only way I could get them to come quickly. When the officers arrived, they found the access point. 2 of them went under the house with heavy flashlights. I waited on the sidewalk, wrapped in a blanket the paramedics gave me, just staring at that shared wall. When the officers came back out, they looked disturbed. They went next door and pounded on Mr. Kempler's door. No answer. They eventually kicked it in. I watched them drag him out in handcuffs. He didn't look angry or scared. He just looked blank. He just stared at me as they shoved him into the cruiser. One of the officers came over to talk to me later. He told me what they found underneath the house. He said it looked like someone had been spending a lot of time down there. They found a sleeping bag and a cooler directly under my bedroom. But the worst part wasn't the sleeping bag. The officer told me that the subflooring under my bed, the wood right beneath where I slept every night, had been shaved down. He had used tools to sand the wood until it was paper thin. He had drilled tiny, microscopic holes through the wood and the carpet pad. He hadn't just been listening from the other side of the wall. For months, he had been lying directly underneath my mattress, listening to me breathe, listening to me sleep, separated by less than an inch of wood and carpet. The thumping sounds I heard at 2 a.m. weren't heavy books. It was him bumping against the floorboards as he settled in for the night beneath me. I moved out the next day. I broke my lease and left most of my furniture behind. I couldn't look at that bed again. I couldn't walk on that floor knowing he had been right there the whole time. Now I live in a 4th-floor apartment in a concrete building. I don't have a yard, and I don't have a crawl space. But sometimes, when the building is quiet and I'm lying in bed, I still find myself holding my breath, waiting to hear a scratch from below.
When I bought the fixer-upper on Maple Street, I thought I was lucky. The house needed a lot of work, but the price was right, and the neighborhood was quiet. It was the kind of street where people kept their lawns manicured and washed their cars on Sundays. The only thing I didn't account for was the man living directly to my left. His name was Arthur. I learned his name from the mailbox, but we never formally introduced ourselves. He was a tall, wiry man who always wore a gray utility jumpsuit. Every time I looked out my window, he was working on something. He was painting his fence, cleaning his gutters, or reorganizing his garage. He seemed like the perfect neighbor to have if you needed to borrow a tool. I didn't realize then that his obsession with fixing things didn't end at his property line. It started small. About a month after I moved in, I came home from work to find my front lawn perfectly mowed. I hadn't hired anyone, and I certainly hadn't done it myself. I looked over at Arthur's house. He was in his driveway, polishing the chrome on his truck. He didn't look at me. I figured he was just being nice, a sort of welcome to the neighborhood gesture. I waved a hand of thanks in his direction, but he kept his head down, scrubbing a spot on the fender. A week later, I noticed my mailbox. It had been rusty and leaning to the side when I bought the house. I pulled into the driveway after a long shift and saw that it was standing straight up. The rust was gone, and it had been painted a glossy black. This time I felt a little uneasy. It was a nice gesture, sure, but it felt weird that he touched my property without asking. I decided to let it slide. I hate confrontation, and technically, he was doing me a favor. The escalation began in the fall. I was having trouble with the back door. The wood had warped, and it stuck every time I tried to open it. I planned to sand it down on the weekend. But when I woke up on a Thursday morning and went to let the dog out, the door swung open silently. I froze. I examined the frame. The wood had been freshly planed down. There were tiny piles of sawdust on the porch. My stomach dropped. This meant he had been on my back porch while I was sleeping inside. He had been standing inches away from the glass, using tools, shaving away the wood. I walked over to the fence that separated our yards. I wanted to yell, to tell him to stay away. But the yard was empty. His house was silent. I installed a security camera that afternoon. I pointed it directly at the driveway and the back porch. I checked the feed constantly on my phone. For 3 weeks, I saw nothing. The camera only picked up squirrels and the occasional passing car. I started to relax. I convinced myself that maybe I had just been paranoid, or maybe he got the message when he saw the camera go up. Then came the night of the storm. The power went out around 9 p.m. The whole street went black. I lit a few candles in the living room and tried to read, but the silence of the house was heavy. Around midnight, I decided to go to bed. I blew out the candles and felt my way down the hallway to the bedroom. I woke up a few hours later. The storm had passed, but the house was dead silent. I didn't know what woke me up at first. I lay there in the dark, listening. Then I smelled it. It was a sharp, chemical smell. It smelled like oil and grease. I sat up slowly. My bedroom door, which usually creaked loudly because of the old hinges, began to move. It drifted open inch by inch without making a single sound. Someone had oiled the hinges. I reached for the baseball bat I kept under the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I saw a silhouette standing in the doorway. It was him. He was wearing that gray jumpsuit. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a screwdriver and a small can of lubricant. He took a step into the room. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floorboard near the foot of my bed. He knelt down, his movements calm and professional, and placed the tip of the screwdriver against a screw in the floor. He turned it slowly. He was tightening the floorboards to stop them from creaking. I screamed. It was a raw, terrified sound that finally broke his trance. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw his face clearly in the moonlight. He looked confused. He looked genuinely hurt that I was upset. He stood up, put the screwdriver back in his belt, and walked out of the room. He didn't run. He just walked away, as if he had finished a job and was clocking out for the day. I locked myself in the bathroom and called the police. By the time they arrived, he was gone. They found his back door open. His house was empty, stripped bare of furniture. It looked like nobody had lived there for years, except for a workshop in the basement. The police investigated my house. What they found made me sick. He hadn't just fixed the door and the floor. They found that the screws in my window latches had been replaced with ones that could be opened from the outside. They found that the vents in my bathroom had been widened. They found a crawlspace access panel in my closet that had been greased and fitted with a new handle. He hadn't been breaking in to hurt me. He had been breaking in to maintain the house, to optimize it for his access. He wanted to be able to move through my home without making a sound. He wanted to come and go as he pleased, like a ghost. I moved out immediately. I couldn't stay in a house that he knew better than I did. I live in a gated apartment complex now, on the top floor. I don't have a yard, I don't have a mailbox. But sometimes, when the building maintenance man comes to fix a leaky faucet or change a light bulb, I have to leave the room. I can't stand the sound of tools anymore. I can't stand the smell of oil. And every night before I sleep, I check the hinges on my bedroom door to make sure they still squeak.